afternoon, everyone. Some of you I've not met before. My name is Letty Salinas, and I serve as the Assistant Superintendent of Instructional Services. And if you logged on a little earlier, or if you already peeked at the agenda, you understand that the superintendent can't make the meeting this afternoon. But it was actually fairly timely, as I was sharing with Ms. Ricard on Friday morning at my Alameda County Office of Education meeting. I had the opportunity to start to learn more about AB SB 86. And so for today's purposes, although the superintendent can't be here today, it will be a good opportunity for us all to start to look at just what this instructional support grant is about. Thank you to our trustee Campbell, who's here, and certainly all the presidents and all of the members who are all here today. And we've got Mr. Battle, and I thought I saw, yep, Mr. Abbasi is here as well. So we'll definitely take notes if there's something we need to return back to and get some information out after this. So looking at the agenda, my apologies, let me get back to looking at the agenda. I see, we have our meeting norms, and they're stated on our task force agenda. And it certainly speaks to the purpose and our goals for this Superintendent's Budget Advisory Task Force. And the bottom line for today is really to start to unpack and learn more about AB SB 86 funding and what's termed as the Expanded Learning Opportunity Grant. And so we're hoping that we'll able to get a little bit of information out to you today, but also to share a little bit about initial brainstorming around how to use these funds. So what I have for the purposes of today, I have information to share as to what the Alameda County Office of Education has shared in their summary slides, but also to start to hear from all of you, just some ideas, some questions, and initial brainstorming as it relates to using these funds to support our students as we start to plan for the incoming school year. So I'm going to go ahead and, is there any questions or any other comments before I get started? Okay, I'm going to go ahead and, great, thank you, Joyce. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And let's see. And you should be able to see that, and I can definitely see, and I see Joyce is raising her hand. Joyce, do you have a question before I get started?
Yes. Are you going to go over, as part of this AB SB 86, about what stakeholders must be involved in the planning of the expenditures of this money?
Yes, I'll have some preliminary conversations around that. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Okay, and I'm going to, oops, just a second. Okay, so to get started, and then I'll keep peeking over to see if there's any questions. Definitely stop me as we're going through it. So just a little bit about the instructional support grants. So you may have seen on the news, or certainly you have heard through leadership or through your own associations, you're hearing about this, what is coming through for school districts. And so the county office shared with us that there's essentially two grants. The in-person instruction grant, which I'm not going to be talking about today, and that is really dealing with schools that come back before the deadline of April 1st for some in-person instruction. And the purpose is to say we're not going to talk about that, but what we're going to focus on today is the Expanded Learning Opportunity Grant. And that is funds that are specifically to support expanded learning that are supplemental to the regular school day. So a little bit about this grant. So in essence, what this speaks to is that we have to provide our students with support to close the gap. And so what that can look like is many different ways. The funding speaks to providing students supplemental support in terms of programs, materials, and certainly looking at tutoring, summer school, extending the school year, extending the school day. It's all around bridging that gap. We've heard that term learning loss. That term learning loss speaks to students who have been participating in distance learning and some who may not to the best of their abilities. We know that as we were working through this year, we worked diligently to ensure students had hotspots and had devices and had really that support. And quite recently on March 8th, we opened up our learning hubs, allowing a space for students who may not have regular access to technology or stable Wi-Fi, where we could really work to meet the needs of those students. All of that we know starts to support that learning gap, but we also know that as we start to assess learning loss, there's going to be other areas of need for our students. And so as I'm sharing the screen here, I want to talk a little bit about what that fund is used for. Now, some of the regulations around that speak to that at least 85% of those funds must be used to provide in-person services. So that would be starting this summer through the rest of the next school year. There is also language around at least 10% of the funds used for hiring of paraprofessionals to provide supplemental instruction and support for our students. And what that speaks to also is during the duration of this program, and also looking at prioritizing full-time paras and supports for English learners and students that may have other exceptional needs, particularly in our special education department, but certainly our English learners. Now, we have to also kind of have the construct that these funds are not ongoing funds. So we're going to have to also kind of think about like, so the purpose of that is that we know that there is an immediate need for students. And then how do we prioritize and work with those funds to really support and address immediately this gap for some of our students, knowing that it is not going to be an ongoing funding opportunity. It also speaks to 15% for the students participating in in-person instruction before in-person instruction services are offered. So we're also looking at certainly what we have right now that we are in the process of negotiating is a hybrid model, also knowing that we will have some students who will continue with distance learning. But again, it's speaking to that learning loss. So it's going to be identifying those students, identifying the students who are in our hubs, who are the most at promise, but also need support. And then what programs are we going to plan to offer them? Now, if there are, I'm going to admit somebody in here. If there is a no in-person instruction grant, then up to 10% may be used for school reopening. Now, as I said, there are some districts who will not be offering in-person instruction this school year. And so 10% can be used out of this funding source for that purpose. Right now, we are projected at looking at about $21 million for Fremont Unified. And so that gives you a snapshot as to what we are thinking we will receive as a school district for this purpose. Now, at the very bottom, you see a note. On or before June 1st, 2021, the LEA, our district, must adopt an expenditure plan at a oops, I'm going to see it. Thank you, Ms. Rodriguez. If you could mute yourself. And that's an expenditure plan at a public school board meeting. So if you're familiar with the processes we've used as a district in the past, then you'll see that there is a way that we have to have public input. We have to have input certainly from our bargaining groups and our administrators, our families. Everyone must give public input, but we also must adopt an expenditure plan before June 1st at a public school board meeting. So if you're familiar with the LCAP, that has a date of, and it's a different funding source, but that has a June 30th date. And so this process for this 21 million must be adopted before the LCAP. So this has a deadline of June 1st. The LCAP has a deadline of June 30th, and it will be two separate plans. And I'm going to go to the next. Um, Continuing on with this expanded learning opportunity grant. The Ed Code says that this is to focus on providing supplemental instruction, and also it includes support for social emotional well-being and certainly food for our students. So as you can imagine, and as you've been watching our board meetings, there is definitely a need across California and certainly within our district to support the social and emotional well-being of all of our students. These supplemental funds can also be used to support our students in that way. As long as, here's a more detailed look at it, we look at increasing instructional minutes or days for students. That can be like an after school program. It can be like a 7th period. It can be a 0 period for specific groups of students that have a need that needs to be addressed. We also can look at learning supports that will look at perhaps technology. You know, that we certainly see that our students have had a need to have access to licenses to have more support with technology. That certainly is there. We can look at addressing barriers to learning, looking at hotspots, looking at more devices and technology that will need to be purchased to continue to support students. Community learning hubs, support for credit deficient pupils that really speaks to credit recovery and other opportunities for students to ensure that they graduate college and career ready. And then continuation of pupil assessment of pupil learning. If you remember, as a district, we adopted a program called iReady, and that is to support learning, measuring of learning loss. And there may be a possibility of expanding some of that as it relates to licenses to support that program. All of that is tied to the assessment of pupil learning. And then finally, that last bullet, staff training for trauma-informed practices, supporting our teachers, our principals, our paraprofessionals, the folks who are working with students on a day-to-day basis with trauma-informed practices and support for students. And then there's a little, again, that reminder of the bullet for paraprofessionals and prioritizing paraprofessionals who work with English learners and pupils who are with an IEP or in special education, students with exceptional needs. And then looking at 15% to increase or improve services for students in distance learning. So while they do say that 85% is for in-person services, there is also a set aside amount that where we will target supporting our students who will continue with distance learning. Continuing with this, around the June 1st, all of this, so backwards mapping, we would have input sessions, we would collect information from all of our stakeholders, all with the end date goal of a June 1st at a deadline of a public meeting with our Board of Education that would adopt a plan addressing all of this, assessing the needs of pupils, a plan that informs parents and guardians of the learning recovery supports, ensuring that we have this translated in languages where we have 15% or more of a primary language. For us, it is Mandarin and Spanish as a district. And also that it details how, and this speaks to what Joyce had brought up, the involvement of parents and staff, including our classified and certificated in the development of the plan. And it speaks to our supplemental instructional support and the expenditure plan for how the funds will be coordinated with our ESSER funds. So although it seems like it's a plan that's in isolation, in many ways we have to show how we're building and supplementing the use of our ESSER funds. After our Board of Education adopts and approves the plan by the June 1st deadline, then we have to submit it to the County Office of Education within 5 days. And then we'll be able to start to receive or expend funds a portion before the adoption of the plan. Now, excuse me. So that did come up in our meeting with the county office. Districts were asking if we're already on track, can we go ahead and start to spend some of the funds before the board adopts on June 1st? They said yes. As long as our public is well aware of what is happening. So I will give you an example. If a school district is thinking about using the funds for summer school or a program that's going to start immediately after the last day of school, and they need to start to, for example, post for positions or start to encumber funds paying for salaries for teachers who will teach summer school. Those kinds of actions can start even before the board has adopted before June 1st. But that would be something we can look at as a district, but there is that flexibility. And then the template will be available for us soon, so we can start to work on that. And I'm gonna go ahead and stop sharing my screen. Okay. So I know that was very short presentation, but I think for the purposes of today and our beginning discussion around this, it was important to share the information I just received on Friday, so we could start to really hear from you all as to some of your ideas or questions that you have about this fund, and then we could start to plan out. And I do want to share, I know Trustee Jones was unable to make it, but she did email some of her ideas as well as to how to use these funds. And then I'll start with Ms. Ricard.
You had mentioned all the stakeholders involved and it's on that slide. Do you anticipate that the superintendent is going to meet with each stakeholder group, including this group here?
So what I was looking at was really coming up with an engagement plan. It will be important that we share some of this information, certainly at an upcoming board meeting, so that the general public hears about it. But I would envision that we would start to have scheduling some meetings with the associations as well, along with a survey. I will say that I'm so happy that really the degree of engagement with surveys has been pretty strong in Fremont Unified this year, and ensuring that we have that voice for folks who maybe that is one of the best ways to really get feedback from them. So I would envision we would also do a survey. And so if you'd like, is there some preliminary ideas or some other questions you have about this? And then we could start to really just kind of talk about what would be some of our next steps. Yes, Trustee Campbell?
Is there any particular limitations on what we could use the funding for? In terms of actual, I mean, I know there's broad terms that it has to go to like mental health support or whatever, but is there anything specific? Because I do recall at our last meeting, I had mentioned that it's a good source for us in terms of helping with our mental health crisis. Understandably, one community member reminded me that it's one-time funds, as you had indicated that they were one-time funds. So I reflected on that for a while, and I was just wondering if there was any sort of limitations on or can we just imagine anything and just throw it out and see what sticks?
Well, as with all of the funds, there's always, it really should be tied to some research-based practices. I have not read, I will look into it and follow up. A lot of times these funds are tied to ensuring that it's tied to research-based practice, good research-based practices. But I think for our purposes, what will be important is for us to look at data and just who are the students who are not making the growth that they need to make, because that is one of the things we have to focus on, is ensuring that our most at promise students do have preliminary, or I would say prioritized access in some ways. So if it's a hub or summer school. At the upcoming board meeting on the 24th, Mr. Musto will be presenting some of the data around grading and what the grades look like for our students and how students have fared, with distance learning. So I would say that we would look at data sources to really make sure that it's targeting student need. For example, one of the things we're looking at is a summer academy. And I say that as we were already looking at it, just looking at the math grades and what those look like as a district. So I would say that as long as it's research-based, it's targeted for our prioritizing students who are the most in need. And then looking at that balance of the social emotional and the academic, because they really go hand in hand. And again, knowing that it is one-time funds. That's the, that's what the unfortunate part. We want to make sure that we build sustainability to a degree, and a lot of times sustainability does come with investing in professional development for our staff, because there are staff, and what better investment. So that might be an area of need as well that we could focus on, and that's a way to make it sustainable.
Regarding, data, I know a lot of data is, quantitative, right? And so we just look at the numbers and we look at the numbers, but there's a lot of qualitative data that's so important that we sort of gloss over because we don't think that that's relevant if it doesn't add up to 100%, right? And so I want us to, and I've been hearing a lot of that lately. And again, I've been doing some self-reflecting, and I recognize that, qualitative data can tell a great story. And oftentimes we don't hear the story behind what's actually boots on the ground. So I really want to hear more of that. I want to hear more of what the students are thinking, what the teachers are thinking, what the administrators are thinking, and not just throw a bunch of numbers at me, because that doesn't really help with what really, because, for example, if you only have in one school, you have one African-American student, that doesn't tell a story of how that one African-American student is feeling when you do data that sort of, you can't even get to them because they're invisible because it's only one, right? So I need to hear more about what's actually happening when you start to talk about data. I want it to be both, qualitative and quantitative data to support theory, because it doesn't make sense to me when there's a theory behind a small, teeny, tiny number, right?
That's good. And I'm making some notes that certainly with our student groups and the possibility of perhaps, I don't know how many of you've done a fishbowl where students volunteer to be part of the process, and they're facilitated, with an open discussion, and we're able to gather some real world examples of their reality. And so I'm making a note that might be something we can definitely look at with our secondary students. And any other question? Oh, go ahead, Victoria.
Thanks, Letty. I'm trying to think back on when we had they were one-time funds, but they were released ongoing, like year after year. I'm not sure if Marcus or Rice were, maybe in another district, but remember that well, right? For class size reductions, for example. So we had to keep a lot of our employees in temporary status year after year because those were temporary funds. And we do that often with categoricals fundings as well. So even though someone might have been a teacher on special assignment serving English language learners for a number of years, that position would continue to be temporary because we never know from year to year. So I absolutely hear the concerns about committing the funds, but for people, because we talk about all the time with ongoing funds versus one-time funds and committing those to people. But I think given the extenuating circumstances now, much of these resources are going to need to be spent on people. Paraprofessionals obviously being specifically called out, but I think mental health professionals also would be a great investment. And we know that in posting them, it is listed as a position that goes through the 21-22 school year. And that is something that we have done in the past. So I'm wondering kind of what sort of discussions, if any, have been had about that. And then obviously it's great to have Joyce here because, then from a classified perspective, they go in like 3-month or 90-day rotations. It's not quite the same as where there is this one or two times during the year when a certificated might be noticed for the following year.
So there haven't been any discussions yet as it relates to these funds in terms of long-term positions. Really, a lot of it has been what I shared with you a bit ago when we were looking at some of the LCAP funds for Summers Academy. That's pretty much as far as we've gotten. But I definitely hear you. Yes, I've seen that where positions are posted with the end date, and it's soft money to say, and it's year to year. So absolutely.
This money only lasts until 1 year, August 31st, 2022. So that's a year and a half. So how soon would the implementation need to be in order to use all of this money by the 31st, 2022?
Yeah. So the regs say that, and I'm in terms of the apportionment, I think we're getting them in two batches, and then that's a technical term, Marcus. We're gonna get them in 2 batches, the 2 apportionments. But my understanding is that we could start using it this summer. We could start to plan for it. So we couldn't use it today, but that this would be really the next school year, but there would be the possibility of using it if the approval date is June 1st. So that, I think that speaks to the spirit of summer school and trying to get a jump on addressing that learning loss.
Cool. That would be cool if we could actually do that, if we could make it work.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And maybe what we could do now is just kind of hear maybe some preliminary ideas that folks are thinking about. And I'd be happy to share Trustee Jones, when she emailed the superintendent, and to just kind of, it's a list, and then just to kind of start us thinking about that. Would that be okay?
Yeah, Leticia, I just have one comment though about learning loss, because learning loss is not, I guess depends on how we're defining learning loss, because learning loss is not always what opportunities students didn't have. I guess I'm thinking about the students at the other end of the spectrum who were planning to, let's say, take a certain course or take a certain AP or take a, they were on a track to go to their ideal school or whatever, and maybe they feel like they fell behind in some way. So I mean, I guess what I'm saying is the learning loss could be expanded opportunities, and it's more of a question I'm asking. It could be for expanded opportunities.
Yes, it's about meeting them where they, I'm sorry, Trustee Jones or Campbell. It's about meeting them where they are. So, which is hence the data. But I think Trustee Campbell's point was well taken, that we're going to have to dig a little deeper to hear the stories of the students, certainly our staff, but really hearing from the students as to what was lost, or how are we going to help to support them to make that transition back.
Mm-hmm. Marcus, I think that's an excellent point that you made about because a lot of times we look at we don't look at enrichment as an option. We always look at intervention, right? Mm-hmm. And intervention, to me, we need to change that word. I hate that word, just so you know, because it's like you jumping into somebody's life to intervene to make something that's wrong right. And we're not doing that. We are enriching their lives by giving them more, whether it means that it is because they're falling behind, but we're still enriching it. So I absolutely love that idea and that theory behind opportunities. And I think Victoria mentioned that earlier as well, to make sure that we have the opportunities available for all students.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, so let me share, in an email from Trustee Jones, she said, in advance of the Budget Advisory Task Force meeting, here are some ideas, since I apologize, I won't be able to attend the meeting. So it's bullets. It says robust summer school programs for both summer 2021 and 2022. Trauma-informed practices, professional development. Adopting a SEL curriculum for the district, and that's the social emotional learning curriculum. Mental health professional development, perhaps mental health first aid training. Restorative practices professional development. This one may be a stretch, but I think we can look at making the case for supporting our students to return who may have potential trauma and behavioral issues. Restorative practices training can help us have a structure in place for dealing with this and improving overall school environment. After school tutoring expansion, one-to-one technology, perhaps supporting a zero period at secondary sites for a year or two, which would allow students to repeat classes. And so that was her list. Certainly, I think we've thought about a lot of that. Is there anybody else who would like to share or advocate, and we're not tied to it. You know, this is just our first time really starting to think about a plan.
I had a couple of ideas as well. I like what Trustee Jones had said. I like that idea of the wellness centers that all of the students are thinking about having at each of the high schools. Maybe we could, stock it with supplies or make it look beautiful or do some type of art project so that the kids could feel like they're part of this sort of developing these wellness centers. Furnishing or colors or pillows or I don't know. And then I'm wondering if our counselors need a tool to help them with assessing wellness. I don't know if that would be a software program that could help them determine where a student is in their wellness health, and maybe guiding them to resources afterwards, because we got that new company that we're working with that helps with this resources, but maybe they need a tool to help them know, what kind of resources they need to be able to tell them that they perhaps need, because that's all I could think of for the moment. I had some other ideas, but I like the ideas that Trustee Jones came up with as well. Thank you.
Who would like to go next? Some preliminary ideas. I'm going to put Mr. Vogel on the spot because I got CC'd on an email from him. Lucas, could you maybe speak to maybe just some ideas about devices and that need?
Sure, I can do that. I appreciate that, Letty. I was debating about whether or not to talk about it, but this coming September, we will definitely have quite a large quantity of Chromebooks that will be going end of life, meaning they won't be getting updates. And so as we look at the priorities of this funding, certainly that is something that we could look at. And I think, I don't want to say that Chromebooks or laptops for students is necessarily the right thing until we've really done a good evaluation, because it may be that software is needed in place of that. But I can say that there's a great need in terms of replacing some of our Chromebooks for our students. There's no question about that.
Thank you, Lucas. Who'd like to share some preliminary thoughts?
Letty, I just wanted to let you know that I'm jotting down everybody's comments and or suggestions.
Thank you. That's great. I know I was looking at my chicken scratch and I said I better be able to read this later.
No worries.
Letty, I'm just gonna say, I'm just shocked that the folks out here don't have ideas on how to spend money. It's like, come on, guys.
We'll
This
get
is
there.
spending money. For Victoria, this is where you live, Victoria.
I
spending
have my
money.
hand up, Marcus.
I know, Marcus. I'm trying to, I said mental health. I have a list, but I also had a question for Joyce before she talks too, because she could add more to this. On paraprofessionals, because we were talking about English language learners, when I worked in New Haven, we actually had paraprofessionals who worked specifically with those students as they're, of course, mainstreamed into classes. So I'm not sure if that's something that FUSD does, and Joyce might be the go-to there.
Well, we do have bilingual paraeducators. A lot of our state preschool instructional aides are bilingual. So it exists, the job description exists. Bilingual paraeducator exists. So that's, yeah, that's an option. Yeah. So I did have my hand raised. It's not so much an idea, but I always want to make sure when we're advocating for staff development as it relates to these things that we're going to have to face when we return in person, whether it's trauma or mental health. All of the trainings should include your classified staff that are going to be working directly in the classroom, but also on a school site, which might mean your office staff that might come in contact with students who might need things. So I just want to make sure that we broaden that scope of training to include all of the staff that's going to be in direct contact with our students. That would include our custodial staff, our food service workers, anybody who in the course of the day is part of the student's life. So
Thank you, Joyce. That's a good point. Absolutely. I see Selena Song.
Yeah, I just wanted to add on to the suggestion about wellness centers. I think supporting more like funds towards that at every single school site would definitely be beneficial for student mental health. But also apart from physical wellness centers, I think virtual wellness centers, like a website, which I think Irvington, we already have developed, would really help students who are in distance learning too, if they choose to be in distance learning. And also maybe like adding other like mental health apps or software programs that might like go with the virtual wellness center, that would definitely be helpful.
Thank you. That's a good point. And I like that. It's also finding that balance, because we will have STEM students who will want to remain in distance learning so that they have access. Perfect. Thank you. Rais, Mr. Abbasi?
So I'm an accountant and I'm a financial person. So my job is to make sure or look at the Marcus is laughing, I know. My job is to provide the long-term fiscal stability for the district. That's my goal, and I keep that in mind. With that in mind, I think we should save some of this money for future uses, knowing that absent this money, we have a structural deficit in our budgets. Our expenditures are more than our revenues. If we take out these one-time monies are going to provide us a balanced budget for next year and the next 2 years. But after that, we have the deficit again. So I think some of this money should be used to increase our reserves, pad up our reserves for future uses, uh, and be mindful of that we don't have to use all this money this year or next year. Some of this money should be used as rainy day funds. I just wanted to
So,
say that and just put that out.
and just to piggyback on the same sentiment, I know my hand's not raised, but I'm piggybacking on what Rice is saying. But I think since we do have a trustee on here, I think it does make sense to earmark a small portion, as Rice said, not all of it, of course, but to be able to leverage for future needs, and we are able to do that to supplement some of our current staffing and utilize a portion to help support our budget in the future. So that's something that I think even in despair, which we're going through right now, there's opportunity. So we do have an opportunity to be able to leverage some of these dollars for the future. And I think that and we can do that. We did it with the CARES Act. So I think that we need to do something similar here. So I would definitely echo what you're saying, Rice.
I think trustee Campbell and then Victoria and then Joanne.
Was Victoria before me? If you want to go before me, Victoria?
No, you're totally fine, Desiree.
Okay, thank you. I hear you. I understand that. And you said legally we could do that, but I think we probably won't spend $21 million in a year and a half, especially if we start in July. But I just want to caution us that we don't take away from this opportunity grant and use it to balance our budget. I just have a real concern about that. Because I think that these funds are given to us as a gift to help us deal with a pandemic and a crisis. And I know we were probably gonna, I mean, I know you don't agree. I hear you trying to jump in. I see you. To say that, you know, to help us deficit spend. And because we don't know what the governor is gonna do from year over year. I mean, we don't know, we're predicting what's gonna happen 2 years from now, but we don't know what that's actually gonna be based on our best guess. So I would just really want us to prioritize this funding for the need that is before us right now. And it's not gonna go away in a year and a half because the kids are not even back in school yet. So we don't know what's gonna happen, but we shouldn't take away from them based on some assumptions that we think the governor is gonna give us. That's just my opinion.
And Trustee Campbell, I think Rice and I would both agree with what you're saying. We were just saying that, and you actually just made our case. You said that this is not gonna go away in 18 months, and we agree with that. That's why we're saying that maybe we need to be careful how we utilize the money, have some that can also help us with future needs. So that's all. So we're all saying the same thing.
Okay, Victoria.
Well, that's just excellent because then I think we're all saying the same thing. I want to build on that then and kind of go back to when we look at expanding how we might utilize paraprofessionals, mental health professionals. So for example, if we brought back social workers in FUSD, which we have utilized in the past, that might be an expense of a few $100,000 that actually could be funded for many years. If we do more of a slow burn, like I think now Rice, Marcus, and Trustee Campbell are all saying we might do, where there's a balance between absolutely investing to serve this need now, but certainly we don't need to blow through the 21 million. So I think it is, I like that idea of just really being thoughtful on how we're spending it, and making real change, and really meeting those needs. So I think those are really good considerations. So thank you for all three of you. Those are good things to think about.
Joanne.
Yeah, thanks. And it is interesting to hear people talk about the money, because I don't know if this has a provision that we really do have to spend it all in this year and a half that we have, because I don't personally like the idea of saving it for the reserves myself, but we have a lot of things that we could spend it on. And I'm wondering if this bill, because I haven't had enough time to look at it, would include any money for teachers and staff. Many people have already spent a lot of their own monies being ready for distance learning. And is there any provision for that? Or extra stipends? I just heard other districts are giving teachers, Oakland's giving everybody $2,000 if they show up for the current face-to-face. Is there anything along those lines? That, yeah, and I don't know.
And Letty, I mean, I just think from our perspective, I mean, we've looked at it. I mean, and it all depends on how these funds are structured. Depends on how we plan to spend those. We can define learning loss initiatives in a lot of different ways, and there are ways that we could do it that could create. And this is just me speaking. And Letty, please jump in if you think I'm going to the left a little too far. But I mean, I think there's definitely opportunities to leverage what you're saying, Joanne, to be able to um, tie it to learning loss. So I'll give an example. Um, if let's say each teacher for next year, and this is just a simple example, just coming right off the top of my head. Let's say each teacher next year agreed to stay 30 minutes after class to provide extended learning for their students. Then there's a value to that. And that could be a stipend for teachers who said, yeah, I'll stay after class for 30 minutes or an hour and give my students extra support. So that's just really a simple example how that could work.
Yeah, absolutely. Those were some of the, if you remember, it's the extended day,
Right.
Extended school year, extended learning. One district I heard where they were saying that from winter break that they would have kind of an extended opportunity for kids during the winter break next year and have running groups during that time. That might be a possibility. It's I think what's they talk about the tight and the loose. What's tight is 85% for in-person, support, instruction, material stuff, 15%, for distance, and then certainly what has been really called out is the 10% towards para. But the loose is, what is our need, and I think as we start to look at that, it's a good problem to have, but I think we don't know yet enough of what has been lost. And I think, going back to, Trustee Campbell, I that's resonating with me. It's like hearing more directly from our students. And I think also, absolutely, also from our staff, what is that balance going to be like as there's the reentry and coming back in as well? What support's going to be needed there? Okay. Okay. Is there any questions that you want us to follow up on? I think certainly looking at closer at the bill, that I think that was a good suggestion. Looking at student voice, staff voice, the qualitative aspect. Anything else that we should look at? Oh, I see hands. Perfect. Victoria?
Thanks, Letty. I'm just wondering, since we were talking about summer school as well, and I think because especially that's closer to now, due to budget cuts, the district previously wasn't doing summer school for elementary school students, and maybe Trustee Campbell could speak more on that. But that was a change, and we know now that that could be a really large need and outside of special education, right? So can the cost of that be utilized through this? And might there be the opportunity to build actually an even more robust program for those students than we've even done in the past? So just not sure if any thoughts there.
Well, we did during our, and Marcus might be able to help me with this too, to help me recall, but we did during that $26 million reduction, balancing budgeting balance solution, we did take away summer school, other than credit recovery and extended learning, that which we had to do for our special ed families. So I do really like that idea, Victoria. When my kids were in elementary school, I sent them to summer school just so I could send them to summer school. They didn't have to go, but I sent them because I wanted to, keep that learning going during the summer. And if the program was available to them, I just sent them. And they never really had to but it was open to families who wanted to send their kids to summer school. And that was a good thing. And that was here in Fremont too. That was when they were in elementary and junior high school. Right here in Fremont, I was able to send them. So I like that idea. I don't know how much it would cost us or how much it would reinstate us, but I wouldn't take that off the table. I would put that on the brainstorming list.
Great, thank you.
Mhm.
Sheila Rodriguez?
Hi, yeah, I'm curious, since we can't spend this money until June, is that right? Is that doable? Because that seems like a great idea, but school ends June 9th. So if we can't even touch this money until the beginning of June, potentially, can we do that? How
It may be for
likely
next
is
summer.
it, I guess?
It might be
Oh,
for
next
next
summer.
summer.
Okay.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it might be for next summer. And I know that, you know, I've got an LCAC meeting coming up, and Victoria and I had, you know, Victoria's our chair, and we started to kind of look at some of the funds that were not expended this year, and there might be a possibility of bridging some of that, using some of those funds. And that's what I'm starting to look at to bring forward to the board and certainly to the LCAC. But then also, as was the suggestion, you know, 2021 and 2022 summer program, and how do we expand it? I do love that idea. Okay, so I think I'm looking at, I've got some notes on some next steps. And I don't know, how often do you all meet? May I ask? Is it once a month?
About once a month.
About once a month, okay. I would like some time to kind of start to look at this, and certainly I'll speak with the superintendent. Would like to start to have some preliminary discussions and just some planning to hear from other folks, start to look at surveys, certainly hear from the other trustees and do some planning around that. So I have some next steps. And then I think if it's okay with superintendent, I might do an update at your next meeting. A very brief update, because I know there'll probably be other things on the agenda, but I can at least give an update as to work done so far. Yeah. And I'm not sure who raised their hand first. Okay,
No, I'm
yes,
just
Trustee
kidding. I
Campbell.
don't know
Go
either.
ahead. Wasn't looking.
I wasn't looking either. Just one quick question for you. Letty, did you say that you were going to send this committee a copy of the legislation or a link to the legislation, or
I
so
can.
that we can have that? Okay, that would
Absolutely,
be
I can.
helpful.
Yes.
So that we're looking at the same thing you're looking at. And that slide that you just shared with us from the county, can you share that with us as well?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, that would be helpful as well. Thank you so much.
Yes.
And the only comment I was going to make was regarding summer school. I mean, I don't think we can wait until next summer to do interventions or to try to get these kids back on schedule. I mean, I think we need to do that this summer. I don't think there's anybody on the board or anybody in the district or any parent that's going to think putting even though the board has not acted on the plan, I don't think there's anybody that's going to be against expanded summer school. I'll just put it that way. So I think, Letty, you're coming to the board with a summer school presentation. I think you should come with a bold summer school plan, and we will, with the understanding and with the board understanding that we are in advance getting everybody on agreement on the same page for doing that expanded summer school. That's just my thought on that. I don't think anybody would disagree. I think the parents would appreciate it also.
Yes, we are planning on bringing something forward, and I think it'll be flexible enough to really look at the funding source. And at that point, although it'll be before my next LCAC meeting, I'll be able to kind of share that we're going to try to balance that out. But yeah, so at least we can get going with posting of positions and hiring and developing the curriculum. Okay. So I've got some great notes. Is there any last words from anyone that they'd like to share before we bring this meeting to a close?
I'm sorry, Letty. I
Go
did have
ahead.
one question
Sure.
because Race had mentioned, Race and Marcus had mentioned it about the CARES Act money. Is it this, because I think we have CARES Act money through the end of this year, right? There's still that last apportionment that's still able to be in effect now. I'm just wondering how much of that is still there and what we've already kind of designated versus what we might be anticipating to see in the reserves. Because I think that goes to Sheila's question, like, is there anything we could do now? Like if students are back on site in, next month, would we actually be able to move on getting some of these additional supports now? Granted, we don't know who might take additional positions or things like that, but we could genuinely post them and try and use those CARES Act monies until we're able to start accessing these funds in a few months.
So I can answer some of that, and maybe Marcus will jump in later. So as the CARES Act money that we received from federal sources, we have some of that money in our budget, but we are anticipating to burn all that money by June 30th. But when we come to this current year money, AB 86, SB 86, that money is going to be allocated to us in May and August in two different installments. And there are two distinct programs: in-person instruction, which begins as of now, and expanded learning opportunities, that is next year, two different programs. So the in-person instruction, if we begin now, suppose in 2 weeks, we should be able to get that about $10 million now. And that can be used for any purpose, any reason. That is very much unrestricted money. Expanded learning opportunities, that is going to be given to us next year, that is not tied to in-person instruction, and that can be used for any other purpose as well. In addition, I'm going to add one more thing. The President Biden just signed a new legislation, $1.9 trillion American Rescue Plan, and we're expecting to get about $8.2 million from that stimulus package. And that can be used for many other educational opportunities as well.
All right, one last follow-up then. If we have that 10 million, and because we go back in person next month, and the district only utilizes 5 million of it, does that mean that the remaining 5 million could actually go into our reserves?
So the way we see that money is very much categorical money, and it has a timeline to spend that money. So what we do on the financial side is we backfill some of the money. We spend this money instead of unrestricted dollars and save unrestricted dollars for other uses. That's what we have done with the CARES Act money that came to us last year. We spent the restricted categorical money first and save our unrestricted dollars, because they can be used at any time, at any point, for anything at all. So this is some of the things that we do in the background. We use restricted dollars first, and then we use unrestricted dollars. The timeline for this expanded learning opportunities and in-person grant, I think the timeline is as of August 2022. So we have some time to spend that money.
Oh, I'm sorry, Rais. It says funds are available for use until August 31, 2022. But I
Correct.
heard that we would get it in 2 installments.
Yes.
So that means that even though they're available till 2022 in August, September, October, November of 2022, we could still be using those funds. Is that correct?
Yes, we can use that money. When they say given to us in May and August, it means the cash comes to us in 2 installments in May and August. But we have the ability to spend that money before that.
Okay, so then, Letty, with that in mind, then, are we thinking that we're going to design a 3-year program? We're going to design a 2-year program. We need to determine how long that these, this, if we get, I don't know if we're gonna get the 10 because we haven't talked about that, but at least if we get to 22 plus what you just talked about with Biden, another 8, you know, that's almost $30 million, a little over $30 million. Is that a 2-year program? Is that a 3-year program? What's the reality of how far these dollars can stretch?
Right, and I think that's what we would have to look at. Because
Okay.
I don't know, and I'd have to
Mhm.
think, and I'll send the legislation out to all of you just to see how long, and I understand what Raíssa is saying, that we use the most restricted and we're able to save. But that I think would almost be also an internal plan that we would have to save, because we're actually using a year out, we're using other funds, but they're not necessarily these same dollars. Because we backfilled, you know, using these more restricted. Okay. Now it's a good problem to have, but it's, you know, definitely our students and our staff need it. So it's coming from a very thankful place. So I appreciate it. So what I'll do is, as soon as we log off, I'll share the PowerPoint and I'll send it all out. And so we all have it. So thank you, everyone. Have a great afternoon, and keep warm. It's freezing outside.
I know it's freezing. I know, I've been out there.
I have the heater
Oh.
on. It doesn't feel like it. All right.
Okay, see you later. Thank
See you
you
later.
so much.
Thank you all.
Uh-huh.
Bye-bye.
Bye.